Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our lecture series in scholarly writing for publication. As you're aware, we have already gone through two series. I did give an overview of what scholarly writing and publication is all about. In our second lecture, I did look at the science behind scholarly writing and publication, but without really going into details, but trying to look at the specific terminologies that are used in the scientific process that generates research outcomes that are documented and communicated to the wider scholarly audience, ladies and gentlemen. In our lecture number 3, ladies and gentlemen, we now go into details of scholarly writing for publication, but more specifically looking at structure and the contents of a research paper. But in this lecture 3, we'll be looking at, we'll limit ourselves to conceptual papers, and we'll look at the structure and the contents of a conceptual paper. Now, welcome, and I want you to stay and keep relaxed throughout this lecture. I do not want you to be stressed, and hopefully we'll be able to understand what the contents of a research paper are. So, ladies and gentlemen, since we are dealing with the conceptual papers, I want to say that conceptual papers report the process and outcome of a research study that does not collect and analyze fresh empirical data. And that's what we discussed in our lecture number 2. We looked at the conceptual papers, and we looked at what we call empirical papers. And we did observe in our lecture 2 that conceptual papers, they document or even report the process and outcome of a research study that does not involve the collection and analysis of fresh empirical data. Now, these papers do not test using freshly collected and analyzed empirical data a set of hypotheses, but these papers may undertake conceptual work of various types, including proposing a new set of propositions and or what you may call hypothesis, propose a new theory or theoretical model containing a representation of a theory in pictorial form, and 3, provide a comprehensive review of work and summarization of literature on a particular topic, and provide a comprehensive review of literature on a particular topic and outline the research issues that need to be examined or analyzed, ladies and gentlemen. And again, provide a comprehensive review of the research that has occurred in a particular period. For example, the previous 5 years, previous 10 years, in the last decade, the last 2 decades, and outline the directions for future research, ladies and gentlemen. And these are conceptual papers or research papers. Now, of the various forms of a conceptual paper can take, papers proposing a new set of propositions or a theoretical model may be the most common form of conceptual papers appearing in academic journals, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we talk about the structure and content of only this form of conceptual paper, and we'll attempt to discuss under the conceptual paper category in this lecture what you need to be doing as a researcher to really come up with a conceptual paper that will be presented for publication, ladies and gentlemen. So for us to look at the structure and the contents of a conceptual paper, I will present this on the screen, and I'm sure now you can see what the structure is like. A conceptual paper typically contains the following aspects. You will find an abstract. An abstract is part of the conceptual paper. You'll find an introduction, ladies and gentlemen. Specification of a theory or a proposition is another part, as you see on the screen here. Discussion, ladies and gentlemen. And then closing paragraph. and then thereafter you'll have references, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is to take you through the various components that form the structure of a conceptual paper, with an objective that at the end of this lecture, you will be able to start working on conceptual papers and send them to the editors of journals for possible publication, ladies and gentlemen. And it is possible for you to do this. And later on, if you really want to go ahead, you can actually design an instrument, go collect data, and then transform the conceptual paper into an empirical paper, ladies and gentlemen. So the nature and contents are covered under each of the parts that I've just given you. Is repeated here in detail, and these are the things that I'm going to discuss. So let's start with the abstract. I'm sure you are still seeing the structure on the screen here. Now, in the abstract, ladies and gentlemen, the abstract of a paper provides an overview of purpose. An abstract of a paper provides the process and outcome of the research work described in that particular paper. And it is provided as a distinct part of the paper, and it is separated from the rest of the paper text, ladies and gentlemen. So the abstract will always be there. And sometimes you may even think that there's no connection between the abstract and the main paper, but it is always there, and you must always produce that abstract. Now, in a printed research paper, the abstract is provided immediately below the paper title and the author details, and before the main text of the paper. Now, also, as you can see, there are no explicit transition statements at the end of the abstract leading to the main paper text that begins below the abstract, ladies and gentlemen. As a result, the abstract remains as a standalone and a distinct unit of the text separated from the main text of the paper. Now, journal articles typically specify a word limit for the abstract. And for example, some journals will say that your abstract should not exceed beyond a maximum of 100 words. Others, they give you a word range between 100 to 250 words for the abstract. Now, it really depends on the journal. I know that journals in Emerald, they will give you a structure that you must follow. And I'll be talking about this structure later on, but possibly not under this lecture. But I just want to encourage you to go and pick any article from any journal under the Emerald Publishing House, and you'll be able to see these things, ladies and gentlemen. So the abstract will always have, and just below the abstract, ladies and gentlemen, on a separate line, a few keywords related to the paper topic need to be listed and identified with the heading keywords. So those, and actually most paper will give you a maximum of 6 keywords that must be provided. Now, in light of these features, ladies and gentlemen, and in writing an abstract, it may help to be concise in writing and still describe the purpose, process, and outcome of a study in a manner that provides a standalone and meaningful description of the study. And as an abstract includes aspects such as the study process and outcomes, it will be appropriate to write the abstract after the complete documentation of the other parts of a research paper. And I can give you a hypothetical example of the abstract for you to understand what I'm talking about. And I'm going to feature that and show it here on the screen so that you understand how an abstract looks like. I have given you an abstract here that has less than 130 words. So the author, sorry, not the author, the editor of the paper gives a specification of between 100 to 250 words. So I'm giving you one that was written by a researcher who gave 127 words. So as you can see, this is typically how the abstracts are written. And let's read together what is appearing on the screen here. And I think you'll be able to appreciate what we are talking about. This paper specifies propositions to explain the occurrence of employees' helping behaviors in organizations. It focuses on one specific category of antecedents, employees' work attitudes of helping behaviors. It covers 7 work-related attitudes of employees as potential antecedents. These work attitudes are calculative commitment, affective commitment, and continuous commitment, job involvement, pay satisfaction, satisfaction with supervision, and satisfaction with co-workers. It specifies propositions describing relationships between each of these 7 work-related attitudes and helping behaviors. It specifies an integrated model that incorporates the 7 propositions in order to provide a comprehensive representation of the positive influences of work attitudes on employee helping behaviors. It also outlines the implications of this integrated model for future research and for practice. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, we are handling conceptual papers, and this is how an abstract for a conceptual paper looks like. And you will typically find abstracts of this nature, and this appears before you actually start writing your introduction. And the keywords in this paper, as you can see, are listed below. You've got commitment, job involvement, job satisfaction, and helping behaviors, ladies and gentlemen. So that is the abstract, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to go to the next part of the conceptual paper, the next component that constitutes that. Right, and that's the introduction, ladies and gentlemen. In some papers, the work background is acceptable, while others, not some papers, but some journals may not like, for instance, background, but they may want the word introduction. So it really depends on the journal where you are sending your manuscript for publication. So as you can see in this part of a conceptual paper, and this is now the introduction, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of the paper is specified, and the topic must come must come early in the introduction section. Further, the specific research question or research issue within the topic that the paper focuses on is also described. And in fact, if you want to present the research gap is also presented in this section of the introduction. Now, the place and significance of the research question in the light of the existing research on the particular topic is also documented. So this is important information that must come up, that must be presented in the background or introduction, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the other thing that must come early in the introduction is what the research paper specifically does in addressing the research question, right? So this must be outlined. For instance, a conceptual paper might propose new concept definitions. For example, a conceptual paper may draw on premises from existing literature. For example, a conceptual paper may apply systematic reasoning to the premises. For example, a conceptual paper may specify propositions using the premises and reasonings, ladies and gentlemen. So this process of conceptual research, which may also be referred to as theorization or theory development or theory building, carried out in the subsequent parts of the paper, is also briefly described in the introduction chapter or introduction part, ladies and gentlemen. So the introduction part of a conceptual paper will document the purpose of the paper in terms of the research question. It focuses on the significance of addressing the research question and the process adopted for theorizing in the subsequent part of the paper to address the research question, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm going to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is to give you a hypothetical example that describes how a typical introduction looks like. And this is a hypothetical example of the text in the introduction section. And I want you to, again, move along with me, and I hope you'll be able to follow through. So you can still see this on the screen, because I want us to move together so that you understand. So this hypothetical example goes as follows, that this paper examines employees' helping behaviors in organizations. Researchers, for example, Bavris, 1992, Clitford, 1995, have noted that helping behaviors are critical for organizational functioning. Now, while existing research has focused mainly on studying the consequences of employee helping behaviors in organizations, researchers, for example, Kelmis 1997, Mackfield 1996, have noted that research needs to examine the antecedents of helping behavior. This paper addresses this gap in the existing research on helping behaviors by specifying the relationship between one category of antecedents, employee work attitudes, and employee helping behaviors. It covers 7 work-related attitudes of employees, namely calculative commitment, affective commitment, continuous commitment, job involvement, pay satisfaction, satisfaction with the supervision, and satisfaction with the co-workers. It specifies 7 propositions, each depicting the relationship between one of these 7 employee work attitudes and employee helping behaviors in organizations. It depicts an integrated model that incorporates the relationship between the relationship specified in these 7 propositions. This paper is organized as follows. It first provides a review of the existing research on employees' helping behaviors. It then points out the need for further research on antecedents of employee helping behaviors. It then reviews the existing specifications of the concept employees helping behaviors and adopts a particular specification of employees helping behaviors. Subsequently, it describes the various categories of possible antecedents of employees helping behaviors and indicates that employees' work attitude is an important category of antecedents whose relationship with employees helping behaviors has not been specified in existing research. Next, drawing on the existing body of knowledge, it identifies 7 work attitudes for specifying their relationship with employees' helping behaviors. Subsequently, drawing on the existing literature, it describes theorizing for specifying relationships between each of these 7 antecedents and employees' helping behaviors, and for depicting an integrated model incorporating the relation between reflected in these 7 propositions. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, it describes the limitations of this paper and its implications for future research and practice. So this is really how the introduction looks like. And this is a sample from one of the conceptual papers that were published in the literature, ladies and gentlemen. So that is how introductions are written, and you need to know exactly what is placed in there. But the most important thing is the research gap, and then, of course, the propositions that are developed and certainly later on moved to another part of this conceptual paper that we call specification of a theory or propositions, and that is part number 3 of the conceptual paper. And part number 3, specification of theory or propositions, is very important because this first part of the paper brings out what we call theory building. And of course, once you go to the empirical paper, if you must collect data from the field, then we go to another component of research that we call theory testing, ladies and gentlemen. But since we are dealing with theory building, and this is the third part, specification of a theory or propositions, this part of the conceptual paper, ladies and gentlemen, describes the core research process, which certainly is referred to as theory building, or theorizing carried out in the paper or the manuscript that you're writing. And theory building typically involves identification of premises, for example, assumptions, for example, principles, and so on, from the existing body of knowledge or from the existing literature. And of course, applying some form of logical reasoning to these aspects in order to suggest the resulting conclusions in the form of conjectures and propositions or hypotheses. Now, these conclusions, ladies and gentlemen, are referred to as propositions or hypotheses. For instance, as a hypothetical example, a paragraph in this part of a conceptual paper may read as follows. Again, I'm going to give you something here on the board for you to understand how you can actually specify a theory, or you can go about theory building and be able to convince your readers that you have something worth saying and you have a reason why you should be listened to, ladies and gentlemen. So this is an example. Again, look at the screen here, and on the screen I'm sure you can see something that you can see text that has been reproduced. So for example, let's read together. Lewis 2000 indicates that employee commitment can take two forms, namely affective commitment and calculative commitment. Now, Troubling 2002 suggests that calculative commitment of an employee reflects an employee's concern for the likely rewards for himself from his contribution to the organization. Research, for example, by Hamis 2004, Kelter 2003, has found a positive relationship between employees' calculative commitment and their concern for rewards. Further, the existing literature, for example, Outreach 2003, Cooper 2000, Jackie 2005, and Davinscon 1977, suggests that when employees are concerned about their own rewards, they are unlikely to perform helping behaviors in an organization. Now, Bruton 1993 has suggested that the more an employee is concerned about his own rewards, the more he will focus on those activities that are rewarded by an organization. So the behaviors that focus on helping coworkers are not rewarded explicitly in organizations. Now, the preceding discussion discusses the employee's calculative commitment, suggests that employees' calculative commitment will reduce the likelihood of their performing helping behaviors. Based on this, it is posited that proposition 1, employees' calculative commitment will have a negative relationship with employee helping behavior. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a part of the paper that has been reproduced for you to understand what we mean by specification of a theory or a specification of propositions, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see in an actual conceptual paper, ladies and gentlemen, the description associated with the specification of a proposition will be different in content because the extent of the literature reviewed, the type of literature reviewed, and of course the type and the extent of literature review documented, and the extent of the description pertaining to theorizing would differ from one researcher to another researcher, and from one topic area to another topic area. However, ladies and gentlemen, in general, usually the texts associated with the specification of a proposition is likely to take a form similar to the one that I've just described. And in a conceptual paper which specifies multiple propositions, as most of the propositions specifying papers typically do, separate text of the nature described or discussed a few minutes ago in the hypothetical example that I gave you certainly will be associated with the specification of each individual propositions, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why in a conceptual paper that typically specifies a theoretical model containing multiple propositions. The text similar to that presented a few minutes ago is associated with each proposition in the theoretical model, ladies and gentlemen. And a collection of such texts associated with multiple propositions constitutes the core content of this form of conceptual paper, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why we need to sit and discuss and see how these things are conceptualized and how they are presented so that you're able to write a paper and send it to the reviewers or editors of journals, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go now to another part of the conceptual paper that I call discussion. And you have that section within the conceptual paper. Now this part of the paper can contain various aspects, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, first in this part of the paper, the conclusions emerging from theorizing done for individual propositions are certainly and typically presented or typically specified. And sometimes individual propositions can be integrated into the overall theoretical model. A theoretical model that contains multiple propositions depicting different connections in the overall theoretical model, ladies and gentlemen. So in such cases, a description of the resulting overall theoretical model can be contained in the discussion section or discussion part of the paper. And thereafter, there is a section that outlines the directions, ladies and gentlemen, that future research can explore based on the specifications or propositions or the theoretical model in the paper. Now, this description can indicate how the concepts contained in the propositions can be measured. And for this, it can indicate that scales for measuring the concepts are either available in the existing literature or can be developed without unreasonable difficulty, ladies and gentlemen. Then it can document as to how future research can benefit by undertaking empirical research to examine the support for the relationship contained or relationships contained in the propositions, ladies and gentlemen. It can also state, ladies and gentlemen, how future research can benefit by doing conceptual research and coming out as implications from the propositions and or theory outlined in the paper, ladies and gentlemen. It may also point out specific research questions that future research or future conceptual research can examine. And thereafter, the implications for practice are described, ladies and gentlemen. So these implications are very important because they do bring out those particular things which are very important, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, the implications for practice are described. And here the paper provides, again, this conceptual paper provides a description of how the practice in a particular area may benefit from the conceptual inputs coming from the theoretical model developed in the paper and also from the empirical knowledge that may result, ladies and gentlemen, resulting from the empirical studies that would assess empirical support for the propositions specified in the paper. So it becomes apparent and important for the researcher to be aware of the fact that the first part of the the first part of the research paper is usually a conceptual part that constitutes theory building. And of course, later in the paper, limitations, if any, of the research may be discussed in this part. And of course, we are talking about the discussion part, right? Either before or after the description of research and practice implication. Now, what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is again to give you a hypothetical example for us to follow. And I'm going to show this on the screen. I'm sure you can see this part, this description or this text, ladies and gentlemen. So join me to read, so that we read together this text, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, this paper has specified 7 propositions describing relationships between employees' helping behaviors and each of the 7 antecedents, namely employees' calculative commitment, affective commitment, continuous commitment, job involvement, pay satisfaction, satisfaction with the supervision, satisfaction with the co-workers. All these antecedents reflect employees' work-related attitudes. Thus, the overall theoretical model emerging from the 7 propositions specified in this paper indicates the nature of effects of employees' work attitudes on employees' helping behaviors in organizations. These 7 propositions depict a comprehensive set of relationships between employees' work attitudes and employees' helping behaviors in organizations. Through the specification of these relationships, it addresses an important gap in existing literature or existing research. The specification of 7 propositions in this paper suggests certain directions for future research. First, future research can carry out empirical studies to examine empirical support for the propositions specified in this paper. Second, the paper focused on only one category of antecedents, employee work attitudes, and posited a set of relationships between these antecedents and employees' helping behaviors. Now, future research can carry out further conceptual work to specify a relationship between other categories of antecedents and employees' helping behaviors. For instance, employees' perception of organizational features such as procedural justice, distributive justice, and organizational support can be another category of antecedents that future research can focus on. Similarly, employee personality-related variables is another category of antecedents that future research could focus on to specify propositions depicting relationships between these antecedents and employees' helping behaviors. Thus, specification of propositions in this paper provides direction for both future conceptual research and empirical research. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the text is quite long, so I'll just skip those other parts and move to the last section of the text. This paper, however, has some limitations. First, it focuses only on one category of antecedents, namely employee work attitudes. It does not include other categories of antecedents, such as employee perceptions of organizational features and employee personality related. Now, because of its focus on only one category of antecedents, it provides only a partial explanation of the reality of employees' helping behaviors. Second, it adopts a particular definition of the concept of employees' helping behaviors in organizations specified in the stream of research that views helping behaviors as employees' non-reward receiving activity in organizations. Recently, some researchers, for example, Melos and the rest, have suggested that helping behaviors in organizations could occur for a variety of reasons, such as altruism, expectation of reward, urge to reciprocate, etc., etc., etc. Right, so the last sentence reads, the first of these 2 limitations can be overcome by the future research that specifies the relationships of other categories of antecedents with employees' helping behaviors, as suggested earlier in one of the directions for future research. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, that is a section that I told you that is very important in the conceptual paper, and we call that a discussion section, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, the third aspect was specification of theory, or what we call propositions, ladies and gentlemen. So now we can move to the 5th part of the conceptual paper that we call the closing paragraph. And ladies and gentlemen, I will also close with the closing paragraph, and this will be the end of this lecture. Possibly in our lecture 4, we'll look at another type of research that we shall call empirical research, and related to, again, what we call thesis and dissertations. So in the closing paragraph of the conceptual paper, ladies and gentlemen, we note that a conceptual paper can contain a closing paragraph as the last paragraph. And this paragraph can briefly summarize the purpose, it can summarize the process, it can summarize the outcome of the conceptual research described in the paper, ladies and gentlemen. And I think in this case, for us to understand exactly what we are talking about in this closing paragraph, Let me just again give you a text that we can read together on the screen here. The text reads as follows. This paper points out that existing research has indicated the need for explaining the occurrence of employees helping behaviors. For addressing this research need, it chose to focus on work-related attitudes as a category of potential antecedents of helping behaviors. It focused on 7 work-related attitudes. It specified 7 propositions and an integrated model depicting the relationship between each of these 7 antecedents and employees' helping behaviors. These 7 propositions may provide a comprehensive representation of the likely influence of work attitudes on employees' helping behaviors. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's an example of the concluding sentence, concluding paragraph in your conceptual paper. The last part of the paper, ladies and gentlemen, is references. We need references. The journal articles that you have read, the scholarly articles, we want to understand what has informed the paper that you are presenting. And this section of references lists references for all the documents cited in the paper, ladies and gentlemen. And journals typically recommend a particular format or structure for listing the references. Please pay attention to these things. If they are using the Chicago style of referencing, use Chicago. If they are recommending the Harvard style of referencing, use the Harvard. If they're recommending the Harvard style of referencing, sorry, not Harvard, but APA, American Psychological Association style of referencing, do so. If they are recommending the Oxford, please go ahead and do that. So journals typically recommend particular formats, and please follow these formats closely. And the details of providing citations for various works and listings in papers can be found on the internet and the various books. And of course, you need also to note at this material time that software packages which can help us to come up with these sort of citations and references are provided. The EndNote software plus a number of other software packages. Before I conclude the discussion and this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give you an exercise. I want to give you an exercise which relates to the structure and contents of a conceptual paper. Now that we have gone through what a conceptual paper is, we have also gone through the various parts that constitute the conceptual paper. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to go to the various journals, go to the various publishing houses on the internet, depending on the area and subject and topic that you want to pursue. Go and download conceptual papers, at least 5 conceptual papers in your area or discipline of study. Right? After downloading these papers, try to read the conceptual paper and identify the parts of the conceptual paper that I've just given you, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, if you go through this, this may help you to see how various individual parts of the conceptual paper coherently fit together in a complete conceptual paper. And in light of this, ladies and gentlemen, as an exercise to enhance understanding, you can now identify a conceptual paper published in a journal, and I've asked you to identify many conceptual papers and read these journal articles or these conceptual papers, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have benefited from our discussion today, which specifically centered around conceptual papers. And in our lecture 3, we are concerned with the structure and contents of a research paper, but this research paper is what we have referred to as a conceptual paper. And of course, the various parts of this conceptual paper that we have seen, which includes 1, the abstract, number 2, the introduction of the paper, number 3, specification of a theory, ladies and gentlemen, or propositions. 4 is the discussion. 5 is the closing paragraph. And 6 references, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this lecture on scholarly writing for publication. And it has been an opportunity and a pleasure for us to meet and discuss. I wish you a nice time. I can always say, ladies and gentlemen, stay well and stay safe. Have a nice time. Bye. We meet again in our lecture 4 when we attempt to look at empirical papers and then dissertation and thesis presentations. Thank you very much. Have a nice time. Bye.